What's up, guys? What's going on? I'm Paul. This is Pauline Theology's daily devotional with Trust in Jesus Ministries. Glad you're here as we're studying the scriptures. We're going through Genesis, and we are in another Toldo. We're at a Toldo with Edom again, Esau again, and this time we're going to talk about the kings and the clans that come from his lineage. So if you haven't read 36, 9 through 43, go ahead and check it out. See what has to stay, stop the tape, and then come back and we'll check it out, man. If you have read it, we're going to jump right on into it, man. So what's the scripture saying? What is actually going on in the narrative? Well, it's just another Toldo. So again, this is another section. The first section we talked about of Esau was a section of his specific progeny, and then his movement from the land of Canaan to where he resides in Mount Seir. And this Toldo is actually going to be his genealogy. The other one was his genealogy, but this one is his genealogy through a longer sense, a deeper sense. We're going to see the generations, how the people of Esau, the Edomites, become the Edomites, their kingdom, their lineage. And I said last episode that this is important, or the writer writing about him in such a way, because he got some big chapter, man. And because it's such a big chapter, we know that Esau is important. And in the last episode, we talked about his importance was the fact that he is not a child of the covenant or a child of the promise. But this is actually going to be about how God is blessing him and then setting up his nation, because his nation, even though it isn't the nation of Israel, it is still important. And that's something that is significant, man. Already, it's just the fact that things are important. There are things that are important. People are important. Our families are important, even if they are not walking or following the way of Christ. We've got to see them as important, because if we don't see them as important, then they never will walk in the way of Christ. And so let's look at people as more significant than ourselves, as Paul says in Philippians. But yeah, we see that in this narrative here that actually it's really just a genealogy, not a narrative. But we see all of the families that derive from Edom, from him and his three wives. And his three wives have children who form all of these nations. Not only these nations, but also clans is a word for it. Chiefs is a word for it. But yes, he has his progeny ends up being huge, great, and they have kings, they have chiefs, they have clans that grow to be big. Now, a couple of things to point out. Really, just one important thing. Not two important things. One is that they're kings. Obviously, is that from the lineage of Edom come kings. From the lineage of Edom come clans, a bunch of different peoples. That's one important thing that we see that the writers try to convey from this passage. But the second thing I think is that there's a little bit of wordage that he puts in there that we should notice. It says that it is before the kings of Israel. And so there's a comparison here between Edom and Jacob, because obviously throughout this entire passage, we see a lot of comparison between them two, even into the New Testament. But this here, I believe, is because the author wants the reader to recognize that the fulfillment of God has happened in the fact that Edom is subjected, which is Esau, is subjected to Jacob, Israel. Remember that prophecy. Remember that foretelling to Rebekah while in the womb they were wrestling, and it says that the greater will serve the younger. Well, I think that is a sign from the writer saying that this fulfillment happened, that they were great. They were great because they had kings. It says, but eventually the kings become subjected under the rule of David and become subjects of the kingdom of Israel. Why is that important? Well, that's why we move on to the questions. What does this say about God? Well, it says that God is faithful to the promise because that subjection, that greater serving the younger is just a fulfillment of what God has said in the past. And so that's just a faithfulness to his word, that what he says will happen. Whatever he says will be accomplished. Another promise that comes from that is just that kings and nations come from the loins of Abraham. It didn't say just from Isaac. That is just where the covenant, where the seed, where all men, all people in the world would be blessed if they humble themselves, if they bless and bless the seed of Abraham. But God said that just nations would come from his loins, kings and nations. And this is being fulfilled right here through Edom, through Esau. And not only do we see his faithfulness, but we see his sovereignty. We see that he is moving things to happen according to the way he wills. But not above his sovereignty, but also in accordance to his sovereignty, I believe we see his omnipotence, his power to carry out the things that he said he was going to do. That's something I probably could have been mentioning throughout the entire time we've been going through these scriptures, is the omnipotence of God, because the only way that he is able to fulfill these promises, the only way he's able to be trustworthy, the only way that he's able to be sovereign is to have the power to carry out the things he said he's going to do. And so I wanted to add that one into this one as well, is just to say that he is omnipotent. He is all powerful. He can do all that he says, because he has the ability to do it. So that's another attribute we can see here as we see the fulfillment of the promises that God has promised to Abraham. What's this say about man? Is that we're subject to his sovereignty. That man is subject to the sovereignty of God. Even as he blesses us, even as he bestows on us this wonderful mercy and kindness, that all these things happen and they're under his will and control to accomplish the goal that he desires to accomplish. That may be a little wordy that I said all that stuff, but the fact of the matter is that Esau was blessed, but still in his blessing, he got subjected to Israel because that was the will of God. And I was about to just jump right on an application, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it, man. Is that how do we apply these truths? How do we apply the faithfulness of God, the sovereignty of God? How do we apply the omnipotence of God and understanding that we are subject to his will regardless? Well, I think we should lean into it. See, if we realize that he is faithful, that he does what he says he's going to do, and then he controls all things, that he moves things to accomplish the task that he desires, then we should lean into those things. Find out what it is that God has called us to, and then push into it. Lean into it. Because as we see that he has the power to carry these things out, as we see that he is in control of all things, regardless of the situation, and we know that he's faithful to do what he says he's going to do, to keep the promises that he has promised us, man, that should bring us to a deeper trust in him because we recognize his trustworthiness. So recognize his trustworthiness today. What is it today that you need to lean into God for? What is it that you need to lean into his faithfulness? What is it that you need to lean into his control, sovereignty, and power today? Then lean into it. I appreciate you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.